One of the first questions that we asked about grief was more directly how it relates to the holidays, but also how it relates to loss that's typical for people that have mental health issues, much like people that might be in recovery, especially early on in recovery. There's a lot of loss. They may have lost connection with family members because of behaviors that were symptomatic of their diagnosis. They're not invited to gatherings. They're, estranged from family members. So you mentioned earlier that you think that you can just be okay without these things and you'll never miss it, but it's a lot of stuff to not miss.
Absolutely.
So how do we fill that hole?
Well, one of the things, and it's a good question, because I think a lot of times I've always functioned with kind of the basic definition of, I guess, the dictionary definition of grief. And the dictionary definition is, it's when something or someone has been rendered inaccessible. And the part that I like to add on to that, and like Shannon just said, it could be a job loss, it could be a death in the family, it could be a relationship that goes bad, it could be disappointment for something we had planned on that doesn't happen. And kind of the common denominator in all of that is very often those are losses that are there that occur through no fault of the individual. It's just something that it happens. And very often the person is caught unawares. And again, when you were bringing up the whole idea of dealing with loss that occurs as a result of a mental health issue, an addiction issue, maybe being estranged by a family member. And, even though as an individual, we may play a part in that, still comes down to addictions and illness. Mental health issues are illnesses. I don't know anybody I've ever worked with, including myself, that ever woke up one day and said, you know what, always wanted to be an alcoholic, now I am one, or always wish I had that issue. And when we talked in group very often with patients and clients, one of the things that I tell them as it pertains to addiction is, I'm not responsible for the illness. I might be responsible for the consequences, and dealing with that, but the whole thing can be just so overwhelming. And like you said earlier, especially in dealing with addiction, which is, my main focus, early recovery is so difficult, because I like to tell folks that I think in early recovery, you're asking the individual to take a situation that maybe they've done, or even in mental health, where, symptoms and issues they've dealt with. We're asking the person to take that situation, completely stop it, do the exact opposite, and be perfectly comfortable with that. And that's not realistic. That can create a whole host of grief and loss as well, because the person's just lost for answers. When we talk about dealing with filling that void, everybody knows the old saying about nature abhors a vacuum. And unfortunately, she'll find a way to fill that void, and it may not be in ways that we want. So we have to have other ways to come up with that. And so much of, if you look at just the process of addiction, or the process of grief, and there's a lot of ways to look at the stages, and I'm kind of I'm lazy, and the less I have to remember, I like to look at it in a 3-stage process. Kind of, there has to be admission, and then we attempt to deal, and then there's acceptance. And I think this is either could be a societal thing where we're taught this, or again, it could be just an embarrassment or fear type of thing. Before a person can start to deal with loss, before we can admit the problem is there, there's a little prequel condition that creeps in called denial that says, what loss? Say it ain't so. That happens to, that doesn't happen to people like me, or society tells us it doesn't happen to people like us. So before we can even attempt to admit the loss has occurred, denial says, what loss? And so we're almost, before we can make one step up, it's like we're knocked 3 steps back, and we have to figure out a way to get to that point. In addiction, and I know with dealing with grief in general, or loss in general, it probably plays into this as well, and I've just never really looked at it this way. In addiction, when I compare the stages of grief to the stages of recovery, the 4 stages of recovery are admission, compliance, acceptance, and surrender. And before admission happens, that prequel of denial kicks in and says, what problem? And, and I think we see variations of that, because there's pure denial that's, again, it didn't happen, not me. And then there's rationalization, which is, well, it did, but here's why. And then one of my favorites is minimizing, and it's not that bad, or I can quit anytime I want, or I can deal with this on. And then there's projection, where, well, it is an issue, but it's your fault. And then we have some other variations of that. So you got to kind of clear out all that clutter before you can even get to the point where you can admit the loss is there. So again, it's kind of 1 step up and 3 steps back, or basically 3 steps back before we can take that 1 step up. So like Shannon mentioned, it really is about filling that void. The holidays can be really difficult, because just the stress that comes with it on top. So you've got an added condition with that, and kind of the frenetic pace. We were talking the other day in group, actually, that you hear people talk about more return to active use, or an active stage of an illness can occur in what they call periods of high stress transition. And the holidays certainly is that, because, on a good day, no matter where you are, it's not where you need to be. You're doing 10 things at one time. I'll clean up the old expression, but it's like cramming 10 pounds of sugar into a 5-pound bag. So you're really, and there's a part that says, if I can't do that, then something's wrong with me. And I think very often people need to understand that grief it's a normal emotion, or a way of handling a loss. And so often as well, I hear people all the time talk about, whatever the loss might be, where a person will make comments about, you should be over that now. You should be, there is no cut, etched in stone time frame that says, it's been X amount of weeks or months, pull yourself together. It's a very individual type of thing, and it's all about finding that way to fill that void, and to fill that niche. And like I said, during the holidays, one of the easiest ways to do, and I do a whole session with my groups that deals with helpful hints to handle the holidays, whether we're looking at grief added into it or not, because very often, especially early in recovery, like I said a few minutes ago, you're asking the person to take something that's been a part of their life for weeks, months, years, decades, stop it, do the exact opposite, and just be perfectly comfortable with it. Well, early on, the holidays could be so difficult because everybody's drinking, everybody's using, everybody's doing, and so you have that sense of how am I going to get through the. I've seen so many times people will say, I need to get sober, but I'll do it after the holidays because this is just too damn tough. You know, I'll start fresh January 1 and that kind of thing. And it's just so hard because one of the ways to deal with this, and I have this handout that I've used for years, and I love it because it's been developed by the people that I work with. It started out with a couple of things that I found to be helpful early in my own sobriety, in my own recovery. And then when I started doing it in group, I'd have people add on things like, well, you know, this isn't on the list. And every year it expands and expands and expands. So it's like the patients and clients that I have created these helpful hints. And it could be something as simple as don't isolate, talk to people, which can be very, very difficult, but it's you know, find an activity, find something, be with other people. And so much of I know one of the questions, and I'm probably jumping ahead here, but one of the questions you had asked was about how does grief increase empathy? And I think, you know, empathy is one of the greatest things, and we can find it in a lot of ways. There's an old saying in AA about it only takes two to have a meeting. You know, it doesn't have to be you know, sitting in a church basement with 85 pots of coffee going and a whole bunch of us. You know, it only takes two people. But I think the empathy really comes from the fact that the person starts to realize they're not so unusual. Other people are going through exactly what I'm going through. If I'm alone, I've told patients for a number of years that there are people that can deal with problems and you know, mental health issues, addiction issues by themselves. They don't need anybody else's help. I think they're few and far between because I need somebody else's opinion, because if I'm the only source and mirror into how good or bad I'm doing, I can get myself into a world of trouble. I mean, I can look at myself in the mirror and convince myself I'm about ready to walk on water. And then I can also, you know, other than convince myself I'm not worth keeping on this planet. And I learned a long time ago that if I'm not worthy of being kept on this planet, I don't deserve your help. If I'm about ready to walk on water, I don't need your help. And we're just not built that way. You know, we're social creatures. We need each other in one form or another. And I think that's the whole thing of empathy, is when you start to find out there's safety in numbers. That, you know, a friend of mine always kind of looks at this whole idea of an old quote he remembers from Groucho Marx, from the comedian from the Marx Brothers. And Groucho apparently one time made a comment about, I'm not sure I'd want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member, you know. And I think a lot of times we feel that that's, if you knew the real me, you wouldn't want to be around me. And then when you're around other folks, you start to find out I'm not quite that bad. Or the old adage of, if you can do it, I can do it. You know, so there's kind of that safety and strength in numbers. There's an old saying in AA that I love about, we can do what I can't. You know, and I think that really just is kind of the cherry on top that basically says that, this problem might be, might be bigger than me, but I don't have to, again, I've mentioned so many times that I have to get sober for myself, but thank God I don't have to do it by myself. And because if I'm left to my own devices, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. So it really is, it's about finding that connection. And right now it's really hard because we've got a whole different set of rules. When everything changed, so many people lost their connection, lost their fellowship, they lost their support system. And my last face-to-face group was St. Patrick's Day night. And the next day we shut everything down. And we were talking the other day about, my God, it's after Thanksgiving and we're still doing group and meetings and church on Zoom and Skype and FaceTime and, just plain old telephone calls and that kind of thing. But it's about finding a way to fill that void as well, because not everybody's comfortable with that. Not everybody has access to that. I remember the first couple of times we did a group online, I had one of the guys in group say, you know what? He said, it's better than nothing. I thought, I didn't, it's like, well, I don't know how to take that, but there really was that sense of, and then people kind of got used to it, and you hate to use the beat up old term now of the new normal, but at least we do have that. But sometimes we have to remember not everybody has that access either. So there's got to be other ways to fill that void. But again, only takes two to have a meeting. It only takes two to have some connection. And very often for people who've been estranged from their families or their loved ones, very often the people that we have in meetings and in group, they're the surrogate family. It's that fills that void for a lot of people is, I might not have the people around me that I want to have around me, but thank God I got these folks, and I think that really is one way to fill that void. And again, there's always going to be people, unfortunately, that just don't have that. And I'm not sure we figured out how to reach that individual yet. Other than if you just, go out to the person and seek them out, which is part of what 12-step work is doing, where you share the message with the next suffering individual. But, that can be even difficult today, where everybody's shut down, quarantined, whatever. So, it still comes down to finding a way to fill that hole and to convince the person they deserve to have that sense of, like I said earlier, when I first got sober, that was the first thing I thought, if you knew the real me, you wouldn't let me sit in here. And then you find out again, you're not quite so bad. So.
And everything you're saying just, I think, rings so true for us and our community that we have in Rockville. I think our clients are at least, doing okay, especially with Thanksgiving just having passed, because they do have that surrogate family with their other community members. And they do have that, in most cases, roommate that they can connect with, and they don't feel so isolated. But it seems like some of the common themes here, as far as an antidote to the grief, is relationships and connecting.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, again, and that's where the things like group homes, sober living is so important, because there is that connection. And also through that connection, the other side of it is accountability, and you're not just responsible for you, you're responsible in one way or another for your housemates, your roommates, because their well-being depends on your well-being, and again, it really is not to sound too cliche, but it really is that team effort, and whether it's coming from each other, coming from us, whatever level. So again, I think you're right. It kind of crosses all across the spectrum in terms of, not staying isolated, not being, away from just human connection. So.
And one thing that couple comments that you made about the empathy that I think really pertains to the people that live in our community, in our supported living community, was whenever they look around and they see people that have gone through and are experiencing the exact same things that they have done, and then they see, oh, and this person's enjoying life.
Absolutely.
And it's like, if they can do this, then I can do this. And, and this is how to give that hope. And we say, truly, we have a supported living community. It's not a treatment program. It's not any kind of therapy that's there, but there's just something so therapeutic about that connection and about that hope that comes from seeing other people that are enjoying life that have been through what you've been through.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really key word, and that's hope. I think in order to gain hope, we have to be hopeful, and we have to see it somewhere. And very often it's more important to see it from other people, because I know you've all experienced this, where we tell somebody, whatever the situation is, it's going to get better. Just, it takes time. Hang in there, day at a time, whatever. And so often it's like, well, they expect us to say that, but it's like, don't tell me, show me. So you need to have somebody else say, you know what? I was in that same spot, and look at where I am now. And at first that individual might think, well, that's you, that's not me. Again, if you knew the real me. And then you start to find out that, these people are exactly like me. And, I think that's one of the things that when a person can make the transition from identifying out, you've never experienced this, you've never experienced that. When we can put that energy into focusing on, well, I never experienced that, but here's the similarity. I did this. In fact, I tell folks, as an example, in one of my education classes, and most of the people that come in through that, they've had some legal intervention, a DWI or a possession charge or something. And when we do signs and symptoms, just as a look in the mirror, what I like to call the is I is or is I ain't sessions. And I tell people that, you can look at that list and say, well, I never did that, and I never did that. And I tell them, look at the similarities. I don't care what even my treatment folks, I don't care what brings us together. We look at that common factor. And I tell people, not to sound flip about it, but I said, I can look around the room or now look around the screen, and I can almost guarantee there's nobody who's sitting here right now because you got nothing better to do on a Tuesday night or a Saturday morning. Something happened. It's just a matter of degree. You look at, the vehicle might be different, but the destination's the same. We're sitting there. So when I have people, and I can look at my education groups and I tell them, please don't get upset with me, but I can look at everybody sitting in there and identify with everybody there, or identify out with everybody there, because I never got arrested. And I tell them it wasn't from lack of trying. It just never happened. And I tell them, before you pick up your chair and throw it at me, I don't think I'm looking at anybody that lost 4 jobs in 6 months, but that's me. So we could spend all, till the cows come home. I'm not like that. But if you start to look at the similarities, all of a sudden you start to get some work done, and there's that empathy and that common bond, and it stops being a them problem and becomes an us problem. Yeah, and I think that's where, again, you can really start to make some headway, and providing that hope that yes, I was in this situation. It took work, it took time, but if you do, there's an old saying in NA about you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. And I tell people, I like to put a positive spin on that. You keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting, and that's well. There has to be that hopeful, because if you walk in and it's like people in 12-step framework, so many people immediately, and I did too. I wasn't a first nighter. Took me a couple of times to figure this out. The first stumbling block for most people in a first step is that word powerless, because people misinterpret that. Society tells us powerless means failure. It means weak, hopeless. Again, I tell people that word powerless just means it's bigger than me. And I've always looked at, sometimes you have to become a little, powerless to become powerful. And I think when you look at the example I use is, if somebody sees me trying to move a 2-ton weight, if you watch me try to move that, what you're going to see is me hurt myself, and you're not going to see that thing budge an inch. But if all of us put our shoulder to it, we might scooch it along if we keep doing it. So, it doesn't mean that I'm weak. It just means that thing's bigger than I am. And I think if somebody sees there is hope, that it's like if somebody's had surgery and they go in for physical therapy, that first day, I mean, you just look at it, it's like, why bother? I can't do. But then you start to see other people are progressing. They're putting the effort, and just maybe if they can do it, somebody that you saw that came in and, couldn't walk, and now after a couple of weeks or months, they're, on their own, power. And, you look at, this is what they did, and I'm doing the same thing. Just maybe I'll have that same result. So, it's learning by repetition, and seeing it in somebody else's life.
And that hits so much on this bullet point that I sent to you. It was more of just a statement than a question, really. I'm interested to hear what it meant to you. But there's a bullet point on here that says fighting for joy. Yeah, and everything that you're saying really is that fight, because you're not talking about this, trying to fill that hole by being inactive or through osmosis, right? You're actually talking about doing work, whether, maybe some individual, but a lot more work in, bouncing ideas off of other people, coming together as a community. And I've been struggling to kind of figure out what the fighting for joy meant for me. But as you kind of go deeper into some of these explanations, I'm like, that's it. That's what fighting for joy really is.
And I love that bullet point, because I thought, well, that's an interesting concept. And then I thought, before we can fight for joy, we have to give ourselves permission that we deserve it. And I think that's where it all starts, where, again, why bother? Why, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member. And I think, again, that's just such a great concept about, it doesn't, I tell folks in group all the time that one of my pet peeves, and people do, and I hear people describe their length of sobriety and that type of thing, or their length of recovery, whatever their illness might be. They'll describe it because they're almost embarrassed, and they'll say, I only have. And I tell, God, it's like, only is like nails on a blackboard. I tell, please don't demean the effort that you've put in. The only difference between me and somebody brand new is I started before them. There's an old joke in AA about the most person in the room who's got the most sobriety is whoever woke up first this morning, and so it's still an effort every day. But I think when people start to tell themselves, I only have, and I tell them, you look around in a meeting or a group, wherever it might be, nobody is in there. Nobody's sober by accident. We're sober because we're working on it and we deserve it, And again, it might sound kind of silly, but I tell people if your last drink was in the parking lot to get up enough nerve to come in here and you've been sober 15 minutes, that's 15 minutes more than you had 16 minutes ago. So it's got to start somewhere. So there really is that that sense of joy. I also like to look kind of putting a recovery spin on that idea of joy. I am a firm believer that quantity of sobriety, good health, whatever term you want to put on, quantity is a wonderful thing. There's nothing like marking off days on the calendar, and that kind of quality is what we deserve. And quality is what the people around us deserve. Family, friends, co-workers, neighbors. And unfortunately, quantity does not necessarily breed quality. Quality will always breed quantity. And I tell people, you're going to run into the individual, one day that's been sober since the dawn of time, and they're the most miserable person you ever met in your life. Thankfully, those are few and far between, but you're also going to run into that individual who's been sober for 30 days and they just glow. And they'll tell you, I don't know what it is, but I want more of it. Quantity does not necessarily breed quality. Quality always will breed that quantity. And I think in wellness, recovery, whatever, again, term you want to use, the word that we attach so often to quality, and I guess you probably could extend it to joy, and that's serenity. We want, serenity is peace of mind and harmony, and balance in our lives. And the more balance and harmony we have, the more serenity we get. And again, that's the joy to me, is kind of the reward at the end of the day for a good day's work. Just that sense of inner pleasure and inner peace that, my life might not be firing on all the cylinders today, but it's better than what it was yesterday, and a whole lot better than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So it really is. It's about the quality of the effort, and I think that all starts with, yes, you deserve it just like everybody else. That's all I got.